Thank you for joining the online talk, Resisting Militarization, Advocating Pacifism. This talk is organized by the Peace Institute in Ljubljana within a project supported by Civitates program of the Network of European Foundations. We are grateful to all three our speakers from Ukraine, United Kingdom, and Croatia for taking time to join the talk, and particularly grateful to Mr. Yurii Sheliazhenko, who has managed staying in Kiev to join the talk and talk to us in these difficult and tragic circumstances of the war in Ukraine. As it is clear from the title of the talk, the main focus of today's discussion is increased militarization on one side and the situation and prospects of peace movement on the other side. The context for raising these issues is obviously the war in Ukraine, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the military actions and discourse that is prevailing now. Let me introduce our speakers. Mr. Yurii Sheliazhenko is holding Ph.D. in law. He is Executive Secretary of the Ukrainian Pacifist Movement. He is board member of the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, member of the board of directors of the World Beyond War, Master of Mediation and Conflict Management. Also with us is Mr. Samuel Perlo-Freeman. He holds Ph.D. in economy and is a researcher and the campaign against the arms trade based in the UK. And he previously worked at the World Peace Foundation for the project Global Arms Business and Corruption. And Ms. Vesna Teršelič, she is director of Documenta-Center for Dealing with the Past, based in Croatia. She was early director of Center for Peace Studies and the founder and coordinator of the anti-war campaign in Croatia. We'll open the questions during this talk, such as who arms wars and who benefits from the militarization, how arms business influences international politics and global governance, in which way this military opposition between global powers have influenced the war in Ukraine and the risk of the world war, how to sustain pacifism in the current circumstances of the war in Ukraine and in long term. And we will see what is the situation of peace activists in Ukraine today and what it has been since 2014. From Vesna, we will see what we can learn from the experience of peace activists during and after the war in Croatia and former Yugoslavia. At the end, of course, the main question is how to build world beyond war, who shall play a role in that, and can the role of international law and the United Nations and other multilateral organizations can be strengthened, at the same time role of military alliances diminished. We will also see what is the role of the media in all of this. Let us start by hearing from Yurii, Mr. Sheliazhenko, what is the situation in Ukraine today, almost 1 month after the beginning of the invasion, how the life looks for him and people in Kiev today, and how he sees this today's situation from inside, and particularly from his perspective of pacifist. Please, Yurii.
Thank you for inviting me, and I will gladly share what is happening. Of course, to live now in Kiev is not safe, but I should stay here, and now babach outside the window. I don't know whether Mike shared this sound, but it was distant sound of explosion right now. And it is more distant than, for example, half an hour ago. Half an hour ago it was bach. And yeah, it is of course scary. but I should stay here with my people, with my family, with my country. And of course, if such possibility ever can exist, like to evacuate from capital of Ukraine turned into battlefield, I probably may consider it, but our government just prohibit all men from in age from 18 to 60 from leaving the country, because our government thinks that all men should fight Russia. And you know, Ukraine is a unique country. You can't find any other country in which police and armed forces post on social networks receipts how you can make Molotov cocktails. And you know, police calling the people to make Molotov cocktails, it is a unique situation for whole the world. And it is because our government intends to mobilize whole population for armed resistance to Russian. Non-violent resistance is not considered. We have these peace talks, but interestingly, our government create some picture that it continues to negotiate, but among people, when you are starting to advocate peace talks, to modeling how to achieve success in peace talks, it is so many hate around, hate about Russians, calls to kill Russians. It was even a situation when a medic which provides help to Ukrainians and to these people who are surrendered to Ukraine, military prisoners. This medic in emotional outburst said some very weird things about castration of Russian and so on. Then he apologized, of course, but such sort of outbursts and calls to exclude pacifists as traitors from any public discourse and conversation is widespread. And yesterday, Ukrainian Security Council prohibited one big opposition party, opposition bloc for life, which advocated peace and negotiations and more close relations with Russia, just because any even a little bit of pro-Russianness, even if you criticize Russia, but you are not calling to kill Russia, it is considered as some sort of traitor behavior because of this mobilizing military effort. And it is a result of militarization of society, militarization of culture, militarization of political life during many years. It started, of course, it is common legacy in Russia and in Ukraine, a common legacy of Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was very militarized country. They had even pictures of soldiers in children ABC books, of course, weapons, toys, and so on. This cult of victory in Great Patriotic War which was some sort of uniquely Soviet national version of World War II. Conscription, so-called military patriotic upbringing, all of that is instrument how to any political power without democratic check and balances can mobilize whole population against any enemy. Ability of government to conscript any number of soldiers to conduct intensive hate campaigns and mobilization campaign and wage wars completely unchecked by popular opinion, complete lack of public critical discourse about army, about violent solution of conflicts. It is very disturbing things, and it is what internally push Russia in aggression against Ukraine. It is what pushes Ukraine towards violent solutions of internal problems like national cohesion and so on. That's why instead of talking with Russians about common life, we just prohibited Russian language in public space. That's why instead of complying with Minsk agreements, which was internationally approved peace solution for this conflict between government and Russia-supported separatists, instead of that, during 7 years after Minsk agreements, Ukraine continued to violate, and separatists continued to violate Minsk agreements. It was constant violations of ceasefire in the contact line in Donbass, and then it escalated to current full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine, especially after some events which happened last summer, including NATO summit talking about nuclear opposition to war. By the way, NATO dared to condemn a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is a hope for all humanity. Outlawing nuclear weapons is a big deal and a great hope, but no, NATO said we need these weapons to threaten Russia, because threatening is usual response. When United States pursued so-called diplomatic solution to Russian gathering armed forces around Ukraine, United States threatened Russia. When now United States don't want involvement of China on the side of Russia, United States threatened China. These threats lead to nothing, because force, this hegemony just gives bad examples for Russia and China. Russia and China see that United States behave like a hegemon with these archaic ideas how to rule the world by violence. It is not what should be in contemporary world. In contemporary world, we should develop culture of peace, some basic elements of pacific settlement of disputes. Even in schools, in programs of civic education, now for school children in developed countries, they are taught how to not to beat, not to bully, but to negotiate, to mediate. And if it is good for children, it should be good for nations.
Okay.
Instead of that, threats. And how to deal with it? Of course, this conflict is beyond Ukraine. it is global conflict. It has two tracks, track of West versus East and track of Russia versus Ukraine. Expansion of NATO is one of main problems on the track West versus East. And to deal with this problem, of course, we need negotiations between United States and Russia. They can't find common ground now, so probably they need mediator. Maybe China can become such mediator, but it is lack of trust from the side of United States to China, and also United States see in China a competitor. So it is a very complicated situation in this global track. Many obstacles to development of nonviolent global governance, which we should pursue, and to overcome this problem, we should think about popular push for nonviolent global governance. You know, civil society in the West, or in United States, in Europe, should come, for example, to support such initiatives as No to NATO, No to War, or this Europe for Peace campaign, or campaign for conscientious objection to military service, and just say governments that people demand solution of conflicts not by killings and destruction, but at the negotiation table. And of course, similarly, we need to build contacts with civil society in Russia and China. And these sanctions, which demand severe of ties between different fragments of global civil society, is not constructive. Instead of that, we should develop global civil society critical to any war machines in any countries, and approval to non-violent governance movements, peace movements, peace activity in all countries in the world, by all people of the world as one whole. It is what can civil society
Yurii,
can do.
may I stop you at this point, and we will continue to hear your views on this pacifist options. Just to give floor to Sam about this war machine, as you said, to hear about his research about militarization, and who are the players there, how arms trade fuel wars around the world, and how he sees as a researcher these increased calls for militarization and supply of arms to Ukraine, and also commitments to deployment of NATO troops increasingly in the East and so on. Sam, what are your findings about who benefits from militarization?
So in terms of the question of who arms wars around the world, unfortunately, the answer is pretty much everyone. Every country with an arms industry is engaged to a greater or lesser extent in the global arms trade, and is quite willing to arm countries at war around the world. Of course, not every exporter arms every war, because some countries want to buy from particular suppliers that that have the equipment that they want. There are geopolitical relationships, which means some countries will not sell to each other. You know, the US has its list of enemy countries that it won't sell to. On the other hand, you'll see that Russia and China, for example, don't have that good relationships with Israel, or Israel is so closely tied to the US that it gets almost all its arms from the US. China doesn't arm India as they are rivals. Virtually everyone else arms India. So I did some research last year. I'll send you a link to a website that's just gone up. I'm putting this in the chat on who arms war. It was just looking statistically at the top 11 arms suppliers, arms exporters in the world over the period I was looking at, and which of them sold arms to which of the wars that took place in the 2000s. And also looking at what factors drove whether a country would arm another country or not. And did war act as a limiting factor, as a reason for not supplying arms to a country? And unfortunately, the answer is no. There's no statistical evidence of that at all. And of these top 11, virtually all of them either participated themselves or armed at least half the wars in the data set that I was looking at.
Sam, let us list them, maybe, for not all of colleagues are familiar. The US and Russia are the leaders, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. The US is by far the world's largest arms exporter. And Russia and the UK in financial terms are second and third, in roughly equal. In terms of what SIPRI define as major conventional weapons, the most obvious visible hardware, planes and tanks, Russia is clearly second and the UK is well behind. France and Germany and China and increasingly Israel, South Korea, and several other of the European countries are also among the major exporters.
You also mentioned Ukraine was among exports.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the period that I was looking at, Ukraine was the number 11 arms supplier in the world, and they sold during the 2000s arms to quite a lot of countries that many other countries weren't supplying arms to, like Democratic Republic of Congo, and were, along with Russia, arming both sides in the Ethiopia-Eritrea war, Sudan, and so forth. But you like Russian weapons, Ukrainian exports tend to be on the sort of lower tech and somewhat cheaper end of the spectrum. So they were getting customers among some of the poorer countries in the world, including those involved in armed conflict. Whereas the Western suppliers tend to sell arms to the ones with more money to spend, not necessarily rich countries, but sort of very large, big arms buyers like India, though Russia is also India's biggest supplier. And of course, the West is very, very keen on selling to the Gulf monarchies, the Gulf dictatorships, and the US and the UK in particular are the main armors of Saudi Arabia, which is carrying out a brutal war, every bit of and as more so in Yemen as the Russian attack on Ukraine.
You also, Sam, found about the very much increased military budgets around the world, and in Europe, particularly after the end of Cold War.
Well, immediately after the end of the Cold War, the US and European military spending fell quite significantly. Of course, Russian military spending fell massively compared to what the Soviet Union was spending. Of course, it was just Russia, no longer the Soviet Union. Their economy was crashed. And so it was a tiny fraction. Russian military spending in the early 90s was a tiny fraction of the US. And their military capabilities were, basically destroyed, not through war, but just through economic collapse. So I think, you know, as Yuri's been saying, that was an opportunity for building a different type of security structure in Europe, one not based on massive armaments, but based and military alliances, but based on peaceful relations. And for a while there was a hope of it, but of course after 9/11, military spending started increasing rapidly. China and Russia rearmed and greatly increased their spending. European spending was going down after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. But since 2014 and the start of the Ukraine crisis, the first Ukraine war, European military spending has increased significantly. Of course, it's now going up even more, as we've seen with the German announcement of 100 billion euros extra over however many years. So since then, Europe has doubled down on militarization, on the idea that the only possible answer to Russian behavior in Ukraine is a massive increase in military forces, even if you don't count the US, the European NATO members already between them spend 5 times as much as Russia on their militaries. And yet the message is that without massive rearmament, massive increase in military spending, somehow Europe will be defenseless against Russia.
What does it mean, Sam, for the peace and security, and this what Yurii described as an ideal? Can we, in such circumstances, and consider possibility for promoting peace solutions and some other kind of global governance and order?
I'm not optimistic at the moment. I think we can continue to point out the folly of attempting military solutions to our political and security problems. The catastrophes of the US-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are obvious to most people now. The catastrophic, whatever happens in Ukraine, the Russian invasion is not going to bring Russia security. If they thought that this was an answer to NATO expansion, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's cutting off Russia from the world. It's leading to a strengthening of support for NATO. It could lead to countries like Sweden and Finland joining NATO. It's leading to a massive increase in Western military spending. It's bringing the opposite of security to Russia, whatever happens on the ground in Ukraine. The Saudi war on Yemen has not brought peace to Yemen. It has not brought security to Saudi Arabia. So we can argue for that, but I see very little scope for arguing on a broader scale against this trend towards militarization. We can put the arguments, but everyone seems to be moving in the direction at the moment that we need more arms, we need more military spending, and that relations between the West and Russia, between the US and China, are likely to continue to deteriorate. And to be honest, in the immediate environment, things can change. I don't see great opportunities for getting a different point of view heard.
What about, just one more question, Sam? Yurii mentioned this need for global civil society confronting this trend and requesting different approach and peace movement to be revitalized around. What is the situation in the UK? You are a prominent voice in analyzing UK militarization and role. And what about the peace activism in UK in this matter? And at the moment, are there voices and relevant efforts?
Yes, well, I mean, we do what we can in terms of very specifically focusing on the UK arms trade, UK arms exports, especially in cases like Saudi Arabia. There is a peace movement, a stop the war movement. Of course, there are massive protests against the war in Ukraine, against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, mostly from the perspective of, you know, supporting Ukrainian military defense. The Stop the War movement has also, while condemning the war, has also opposed NATO expansion. I'm not sure they've been very strategic in how they've been going about it. They were too slow to very clearly condemn the Russian invasion. I think there's a tendency in the Western peace movement to see everything through a Western lens, that everything is about Western imperialism. And in a way that's natural, you know, it's the one that we're faced with every day. And we see, you know, when our countries are invading Iraq, it's up to us to be opposing that. But there's been a slowness to sort of see the perspective from those who are facing, for example, Russian imperialism. There was a lack of solidarity with the Syrian people because the overwhelming priority of the Western peace movement there was stop the West getting involved. And that's important. It would have been a disaster if the US had gone to war on a larger scale in Syria. But I think it's tended to mean failing to see that the West is not the only imperialist here. And, you know, I think that they're getting a broader perspective on this, and that they're very clear now that both Russian and Western imperialism must be opposed. But I think that the Western peace movement has made strategic mistakes in that respect.
Okay, Vesna, let us hear from you about your views to this problem of militarization in Europe and globally, and on the opposite side of the prospects for a peace movement and a peace solution of the current conflict. Unmute yourself.
First of all, I oppose invasion, and I am unlikely pacifist, as I believe that in this moment and since the start of attack of Russian army on Ukraine, which is attack on Ukrainians and all citizens of Ukraine. From peace movement, we need to oppose this aggression, and at the same moment to oppose militarization. It might sound controversial to you, but I believe that this is absolutely needed and possible, and that as pacifists, and I believe that I am a peace worker and committed to the peace work, to rebuilding the relationships and building bridges between people where they have even not existed, and of course rebuilding the relationships which have been broken by war. In this moment, when eventually in Mariupol and in other towns, the Russian army is bombing civilians in the earth, so it's that it's really destroying them, is very important to stand with Ukrainians, but it's also very important to stand with conscientious objectors, with the ones who oppose militarization and this intervention in Belarus or Russia. And many of us, we are doing that for many years. But it's not, it's not like we are pacifists and therefore I oppose a military resistance. In this moment, I see that armed resistance to this intervention is very much needed. And standing with people of Ukraine now, for me, means both. It's actually needed to resist with arms, but it's perfectly legitimate and needed also to refuse to bear arms and to simply look for other ways, because there are many other ways. There are many other ways to resist violence and promote and advocate freedom and human rights in non-violent way. And I really speak this out of experience we had during war in Croatia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, all wars of succession in Yugoslavia, disregarding, have there been held in Slovenia in summer of 91, or in Croatia, or in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Kosovo, or it was armed conflict in Macedonia in 2001. So it's that you need solidarity, support, and non-violent work in the moment of armed action, and of course later when rebuilding starts. But this moment is the one where you eventually in Ukraine have need for both.
Yurii, as a peace activist, what was your life before this escalation and invasion, and do you have opportunity to reach out to citizens of Ukraine or to the government with your ideas at the moment? Is your voice heard at the moment?
Before this conflict with Russia, there were not many people concerned discussing the situation of peace in the world and in Ukraine. I participated in some actions, but it were mainly actions against imperialistic war and so on, including, of course, this Iraq war, and of course, these bombardments of Yugoslavia by NATO. I remember some action in which I participated. And I worked a lot in journalism. I tried to conduct some peace journalism. Then I committed to academia, to legal studies, to human rights defense. And last years I worked on my PhD dissertation and defended it. And I lecture in Croatia University in Kiev on legal theory and history, also talking about human rights defense. I am proud to announce that yesterday European Bureau for Conscientious Objection published its annual report, Conscientious Objection in Europe 2021. It includes all countries which are belong to Council of Europe, so you can find your country too in this report, and it explains what problems problems now have conscientious objectors to military service in their commitment to follow their conscience, even against these militaristic tendencies, expanding conscription, unwilling of the military to allow a system of justice, democratically elected governments to implement international standards of conscientious objection. In Ukraine, for example, only members of 10 confessions listed in governmental decree are allowed to apply for conscientious objection, and it is a bureaucratic procedure, you know, with all problems, including hard accessibility of conscientious objection, this bribery. If you apply to alternative service, you can face some weird bureaucratic obstacles and extortion of bribes to access to alternative service. And despite of that, despite of total discrimination of secular resistors to war, such as people who are think that all wars are unjust, or some war, particular war like current war is unjust. Our government just don't comply with recommendations of United Nations Human Rights Committee, which demands to stop this discrimination. But our, for example, Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights says, you know, we have a war, and because of that, we can't for now to stop this discrimination. But we have alternative service. Think about, for example, Azerbaijan or Turkey. They say, we have a war, we will not allow conscientious objector ever. And it is a shame that people can't peacefully follow their conscience and demand peaceful solution of international dispute instead of waging wars. Now we live in a historical moment when we have a big threat before humankind, a threat of World War III, of hunger, of this climate change, and so on. Basically, this old picture of apocalypse, yeah, and it is threat. And what is our hope? Our hope is progress, social justice, environmental justice, scientific knowledge, which can help us to live peacefully according to practical knowledge, effective institutions designed according to evidence-based politics. And we should develop this culture of peace. It is not just choice, individual and collective. It should be based on knowledge. So peace culture, nonviolent conflict resolution should be thoroughly taught in all educational institutions, starting from basic education and higher education. It should be part of mandatory basic education. It should be part of social sciences studies, instead of this reckless financing of some theories of war and reforming by violence. You know, let's kill all corruptioners, let's kill all enemies, let's kill all others, and then we will have peace. Nonsense. It is not like that. Militarists say peace is utopia, but all experience of humankind shows that utopia is peace after the victory in war. Utopia is social reforms by violence. It is not happen like that. Only agreement only negotiation, only non-violent way, gradual developments based on development of knowledge can lead us to peace. And this is what should be taught, what should be said on media. And in media, we don't need this hatred to Russians, to Chinese, to the West, by the way, because in Russia, a lot of hatred to the West is incited by state media. And all this discourse which pushed Russians to invade to Ukraine, this half-truth idea that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, but it is half-truth, because not just Russians and Ukrainians are one people, whole people on the world are one people. It is not like Putin thinks that Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians should unite and fight the West. No, all people on the world should unite and don't fight with anybody and live in peace in better world without armies and borders.
What about, Yurii, this current moment, what Vesna just said? In this current moment, as she said, being peace activist and worker, she still see armed defense as necessary. What is your opinion at this very moment, how to stop this war and invasion? I heard in your video you suggested some options. Obviously, they depend on Putin and basically on him mostly. How do you see the immediate action? What should be done?
Well, it is not like Putin is monster and we should just stop Putin and that's all. Such simplified vision is just part of warmongering. We should, what we should indeed do, it is to tell the truth, like history of conflict, like this knowledge, historical examples of counterproductivity of violence and effective of non-violence. Then we should more think and act and pressure for peace solutions. And I admire these people in Russia who are went to protest against war and they object to military service. They just not cooperate with the military. Thousands of people were arrested in Russia on anti-war actions. Putin labeled participants as traitors, but of course it is brave people, and we should support them. And also in all Western countries, in all Eastern countries, as I said, civil society should demand of governments to stop implement these illusions about solution of conflict via military means, via sanctions, via weapon supplies, and instead of that to engage in negotiations. First of all, to resolve this conflict, which as I said, it is two-track conflict between the West and East and between Russia and Ukraine. All leaders of the sides engaged in conflict should sit at one negotiation table and negotiate in good faith how to live in peace. Biden, Zelensky, Putin, and maybe also Xi Jinping and some maybe representative from Global South should be represented at this negotiation table. Maybe for this purpose, existing fora like United Nations may be used, not misused to escalate this conflict by blaming one side and disregarding anything from another side as disinformation. It is a lot lot of disinformation on all sides. And I started from telling the truth. It is important thing, because instead of blaming, instead of demonizing for any situation, we need proper, comprehensive investigation of any situation and models of restoring justice suitable for all sides. If we would blame one actor and disregard any concerns of this one actor, and especially when we would blame for association all who are seeking to understand this actor and to stop hostilities peacefully, it would not help. It would just create more militancy, and results would be bad, because we have already escalation of this conflict from conflict between two networks, Russian-sponsored network of pro-Russian nationalists and Western-sponsored network of Ukrainian nationalists in Ukraine, which were called Maidan and anti-Maidan. This violent power grabs in Kiev for Ukrainian nationalism, and violent power grabs in Crimea and in Donbass by Russia-supported people and the Russian army too. This war between government and separatists. Now we have Russian invasion and NATO support supply of weapons to Ukraine, and there are calls to close the sky, to create a no-fly zone, and this no-fly zone would mean that NATO will fight Russia. And I'm sure that some corporations such as Raytheon, who supplies Stinger missiles to Ukraine, their stock growth by 6% on New York Stock Exchange. Or for example, Thales, French weapon producer, Javelin missiles they supplied to Ukraine, their raise of stock on stock exchange was 37, even 38% for past months. Lockheed Martin, 14% of growth. They supply fighter jets to European countries in framework of this United States push to militarize Europe. And of course, Europeans are against it. We see that this ultimatum to Putin and Zelensky from Europe for Peace coalition. We see that nonviolent campaigns are organized campaign for conscientious objection. We see that coalition No to NATO, No to War will protest NATO summit in June, and so on. And I think that to create better world, to stop hegemony and launch harmony, we need this global peace talks involving all actors, like, as I said, Biden, Zelensky, Putin, Xi, and they should talk how to develop a new system of governance without pursuing this absolute sovereignty, these spheres of influence and imperialism, without copying bad behavior of United States, but changing behavior from violent global governance to non-violent global governance, probably centered at the United Nations system, and it can help us.
Vesna, from your long experience as a peace activist and in our region, seeing this conflict and remembering what happened to us here how do you see what Yurii is saying, and remembering the role of peace activists during the war and peace activists in Croatia, Serbia, how much it was you were connected and you know, making some joint efforts, and at which point the war stopped? How much these peace efforts of you and many others has contributed, and in which way to the end of the war, and especially then after the war?
I believe we should understand complex solutions, and United Nations have also adopted the responsibility to protect, which embodies a political commitment to end the worst forms of violence. And I believe that in Ukraine, we are witnessing the worst form of violence. And the response should be combined, is armed resistance and nonviolent actions. Because there are obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. And in the war, the only thing which is allowed, which I do not support, and I also believe that war is crime against humanity. And I believe that we can work on uprooting the causes of war, not only by pacifist means, but also by armed means, because the wars in succession of Yugoslavia have also been ended on one side by military actions and on the other side by process of peaceful reintegration. And we need to find a wisdom to remember both the consequences, the trauma, the remains of war are going on for decades. In the last year, we have marked the 80 years of start of Second World War. We are still coping with the consequences, and marked 30 years of start of wars in Slovenia, Croatia. And this year, we're about to mark on 5th of April, beginning of siege of Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And my friends in Bosnia and Herzegovina, whom I met during the demonstration against war in Ukraine 10 days ago in Tuzla, thousands came. And I have seen the sad faces of my friends witnessing this war now, knowing how many decades it will take to heal the wounds. You know, the wounds will be there for civilians and for the soldiers who will become veterans, soldiers of Ukraine, soldiers of Russia, and soldiers of Belarus. So it's that we need all what we can do to eventually first support stopping of war, but on the other side to keep building solidarity. And as you said, Brankice, in the first moment of war, we have been in touch with Peace Institute. Vlasta is here, and I'm really glad to see her, with Center for Anti-War Actions in Belgrade. The first number of Argzin, which we put out, we have put together information on what are war crimes together with Center for Anti-War Action. I doubt that many soldiers have read it then, but it is that we have been doing things in Belgrade. Colleagues have been lighting candles. Women in black started demonstrating against war and are still demonstrating today, because the humanitarian law violations are not widely remembered. You know, crimes in Vukovar and crimes in Srebrenica are not properly remembered in Serbia. They're remembered by our friends, but they're not remembered by official institutions. So it's that building a culture of remembrance and building peace will take a lot of energy. And it is that in European Union, we of course should ask questions how to focus on solidarity and development cooperation. But in the moment, we need to see imperial ambitions of Russia also. As Sam said, we shouldn't make mistake to focus on imperialism of just one side. We should look also on, United States imperialism, but also on Russia imperialism, on Chinese imperialism. So it's that this situation demands very complex answers, and we should understand that neither simple pacifist option will not do, nor just armed response. It is combination of both.
I would just like to, before I open floor, to address this issue of media role at this moment also. Maybe just to ask only Yurii, not to go the whole circle. Yurii, do you have access in sitting in Kiev to all media now, online, European world? Can you follow Russian media from your room, and how do you see this as being now in Ukraine? What the media are doing? As you said, pursuing truth is what you would like to see. Who is providing information now to the world about the war?
Well, mainstream media are, of course, inciting this conflict by mouth of politicians, by mouth of experts, which are for many years paid for corrupted think tanks related to military production industry, including these corporations which I already mentioned, and there are more, of course, of them. Yes, I have access to Western media, all venues, social networks, YouTube, like CNN, Fox News, Euronews, The Guardian, and so on and so on and so on. Of course, talking about Russian media, for example, they are blocked in Ukraine, and they are Russians imposed sanctions on Western media, and it would probably will be big deplatforming of Russia in near future, and this shameful presentation of conflict on both sides, like black-white, we are angels, they are demons, is of course contrary against the truth. The first victim of war is truth, and of course there are technical ways to access Russian media even in situation of blocking. There are VPNs and so on, but problem is that this private use of some backdoors is not public discourse of seeking understanding, mutual understanding. For achieving peace in the world, we need more mutual understanding. We need not to refuse to listen to each other. We should not believe some insiders of hatred and some people who are saying we can't talk with them, they are war criminals, without any critical reflection of what we are doing. This pro-war approach is like we are always right, they are always wrong. and as I said, this is possible because standards of journalism are very low, because there are very few people who are masters of peace journalism. It is not well received because this public discourse of hatred and warmongering is well paid. It is economy of catastrophe. And this economy should be transformed starting from its core. It is big money and big people. So bankers, politicians, civil society leaders, all people who have influence, all people who have resources should commit to transformation of this culture of violence into culture of peace. It is a lot of work ahead, and changes will not be fast. I hope that peace efforts, protesting against war, honest reporting will prevent us from larger escalation and devastating consequences for the world. But on the other hand, urgency of non-violent solutions and non-violent action is great, because without responding to warmongering, it may escalate to uncontrollable and very catastrophic level.
Okay. Let us now stop from four of us and open the floor for participants.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I should
Please.
go after 10 minutes, so
Okay.
please consider it.
Okay. Yes, please. I kindly ask colleagues in the room to make comment or a question. Vlasta Jalušić is my colleague here at the Peace Institute, and also has been a peace activist and political scientist. Yeah, Vlasta, yes, please.
Thank you, Brankica. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. It's difficult for me to talk because I'm full of rage because what is going on. So while also remembering the war in former Yugoslavia and everything, so it really brings me to the edge of rage because what's going on. So I must first express this. So thank you to all three of you for your wise and insightful words that you said. And I'm thinking now basically about three things. One is, you know, how much does the military profits bring about what's going on right now, actually, because you know, if you see that, you know, export of weapons is really rising your profits, you would want to do more, of course. But that's one concern, which is actually something that goes on all the time, basically. But the other thing is that all of us who have been dealing with and studying violence and war know that there are two ways to stop it. Basically two ways, I would say maybe three, but basically there are two ways. One way is that someone is stronger and has more weapons and wins. And the other is that there is a political solution. So one is violent and the other is political solution. And I think that Vesna has actually made us very transparent, you know, what is the, you know, what are the possible ways to go. So and the third way is that there is a third party which is stronger and can threaten, and the two parties would give in, which was the case, I think, with former Yugoslavia, basically, where things were brought so far that horrible crimes happened, And only after that, I would say moral disgust was big enough that there was a possible way to peace talks and to make a peace settlement. So I'm asking myself, you know, how far and how much will have to happen in Ukraine that the disgust will be as big? You know, how much can, I don't know, is there a world community? Is there a Russian public community? Is there anything like that that can react to this, that there will be enough so that the moral disgust will be big enough, so there will be reaction? Because I am afraid that this will be the way here. So my question is, because we know that in the past they have been, let's say, respectful organizations or persons who were at least morally pushing for a political solution so that the violence would stop, because the most important thing is first it should stop. So only then things can start happening. Is there any way, you know, to bring together, let's say, respectful persons or organizations from all over the world, which would do something, you know, to make a pressure? Because I do have a feeling there's nothing like that going on. So I'm wondering, when I try to think about, you know, the most important thing, and that is how to stop violence. And then, of course, all other considerations about which Vesna was and Yurii and Sam were talking, you know, what happens next, you know, the consequences, the refugees, the traumas, etc., etc. I mean, this can happen then. So my question is, if we, as, let's say, peace institutes, activists, there are not very many of us here, not very important persons, I think, but can we do something to pressure? Can we do some pressure, which won't be only, you know, morally talking about this and that, and who knows more, and about geopolitical possible solutions, but nothing will happen, of course, because we will save our souls maybe, but we will do nothing. So that's my main question to ourselves, of course.
Thank you, Vlasta. Sam, you know answer. Huh? Unmute yourself, please.
I'll attempt to answer. I mean, I certainly don't think I have complete answers to this, but a few thoughts. Of course, diplomacy is important, but it's not enough. I follow the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, quite closely, and the world is always telling the Palestinians they should negotiate. They should not use violence to resist the Israelis, and no sanction on Israel, absolutely not. The Palestinians must negotiate. But the problem is, when it's negotiations between a much stronger and a much weaker partner, that just means asking the oppressor nicely, and it's not enough. So with Russia so much stronger than Ukraine, it is not enough to say that that Putin and Zelensky and Xi and whoever else should sit down and discuss things. I think there is already as much disgust as there can be around the world, and there should be, and that is not enough to stop it. So I think for this war to end, that there's a number of things that need to happen. I mean, we might like to see if Putin were removed from office by the Russian people. I don't think there's any immediate prospect of that happening, though. You know, the more pressure there is from Russian peace activists, the better. Russia needs to be convinced that they cannot win, that this war is going nowhere for them. So whether that's from a combination of armed resistance from Ukrainians, from the non-violent resistance by Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, you know, cutting off the train lines, making it more difficult, from sanctions that make it harder for Russia to continue to fund the war. All these can contribute to hopefully getting Putin to realize that Russia cannot simply win and that they're not going to gain anything from this, and that they have to find a political way out. The second thing is that Putin needs a ladder to climb down. That, you know, I'd love to see a situation where Putin is swept aside and, you know, a Russian peace movement takes over and ends the war. I don't think that's very likely. So Putin needs a way, some concessions that he can say, we have achieved what we want. We can claim victory and can have a ceasefire and withdraw and end the war. So Zelensky has already admitted that probably Ukraine is never going to join NATO. So that could be part of a solution, perhaps returning to the Minsk agreements. Though whether there's any possibility of reviving that sort of thing after everything that has happened. So I think you need those two things: enough pressure on Russia to convince them that they can't win, and a ladder to climb down. And then after that, yes, we need to rebuild peaceful links between Russian and Ukrainian people, between Russian and Western people, between the civil society.
Sorry, Sam, Yurii, you want to say that you have to leave?
Yeah, I have to leave, and thank you for great event and many interesting thoughts and remarks. And I see that Daria Zavirzhik wrote in the chat about
I will
work,
connect two of you. Okay, by email, I will connect two of you.
Great. So I wish you success in your peace work, and let's build peace on earth.
Yurii, thank you for joining us. Stay safe. We will stay in touch and try to help as much as we can.
Stay safe, Yurii.
Goodbye. Sam, sorry for interrupting. I didn't hear your last sentence. If you can repeat.
I think I was more or less finished, but just to say that if and when this war is ended, then we really need to work on building those links between civil society, between peoples, and on pushing for an alternative to this logic of power and domination that the US and Russia have both been following. I don't think I don't think we're in a position to talk about that at the moment when the war is so hot and active. But afterwards, we must be building for that now. We need to be looking at what are the peaceful alternatives for global governance, as Yurii was talking about.
Okay. Vesna, yes, please, Vesna.
Maybe a small step would be that I have seen, Vlasta, that you are making notes all the time. That we try to put 1 or 2 pages together and send it to our friends in other post-Yugoslav countries to see with what they agree or disagree. And there is a strong day when we could actually send a message to public and at least to leaders of our countries, but I would say to leaders of EU member countries, going both ways, stressing that while armed resistance is of course needed because the war as it is needs to stop, but reminding that demilitarization and eventual solidarity, rebuilding connections, peace building are obligation, that it makes sense on that day to say that things. And if it's signed then by people who work on peace building for decades here, some people will read it. Although, we cannot perform miracles, but words matter, analysis matters. So that we just propose more complex responses.
Any other comment? Because I wanted to say, Vlasta, to what you said about the ending of war in Yugoslavia and waiting so long for intervention. In this case, I was thinking about it that the intervention, although very much delayed, dreadfully delayed, was possible because of neither of the countries involved in the war in the region had nuclear weapon. And intervention in this Ukraine war is a bit different issue. On the other side, I also wanted to say, listening to you, what we can do in witnessing that everybody goes to Ukraine now, you know, these volunteers to fight, you know, and then journalists to report and so on, but not peace activists, not intellectuals. If all artists or so, if Yurii can join us from Kiev, you know, and if people, journalists go there and come back, I know from Slovenia every day they go and come back, witnessing disaster, but still they go and come back. And we are not going. Should we go physically in a way, like you remember Human Shield at the beginning of the Iraq war? It was not very successful, but it was a message. Or some prominent world figures, as you said, Vlasta, to intervene. Some people are, as you know, having lot of attention and importance in the public sphere. I don't know, maybe it's not reasonable what I'm saying, but just these are my thoughts. Maybe something like that can be done. In addition to what Vesna said, letters or talks like this one or some other ways. Yes, Vesna.
Brankica, speak wisely. I believe that presence is very important, and we need to do it. So it's, you know, it's just to organize ourselves in sensible way, not to make additional pressure and not to become additional burden to our friends there who are anyway having very difficult times. So just to remind ourselves how important it is to make it in a sensible way.
Yes. Anybody else would like to talk? I don't see everybody. Yes, Philip. I see my colleagues' various names. Daria, are you waving? Yes, please, Daria Zavirshek.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your really important contributions. I don't know, Sam, if the website works that you send it to us. As I wrote, I have weekly meetings with social work academics from Ukraine and Lviv, and in somehow showing solidarity and asking people from the ground what they need and what they say and what they see as that we can do. And so the background is that I worked in Ukraine for many years and developing social work department at the Kiev Mohyla University. So I have a long-standing relationship with the people. So what we did from disability academics, activists, networks, and feminist groups and social work academics was more or less writing statements and expressing our solidarity and our being against the invasion. We also discussed a lot what to do with Russian colleagues. And our Ukrainian colleagues definitely said we have to expel all of them from all of the associations and organizations and so. And it took us a while to negotiate and actually discuss the issue about going beyond national divides, understanding people who cannot, who don't protest on the streets to be put in prison for 15 years, but they do express they did give their personal statements, which was really important. I mean, I'm worried. There were many calls, and of course, the whole world talks about remove Putin from UN Council, and then to put them on the court as a crime against humanity and things like that. So how are we going to stop this war if this is the thing that he will face? So I don't think that he can stop himself from the war from this perspective. Well, one of the concrete things I just want to say is the colleagues told us that, for example, in Lviv, where the university still stays, and so they have everything. They lecture, they have shelters in the university, and they provide food. So what we agreed is now that we will unburden the colleagues with lecturing for them. So we can give English courses for social work students that our colleagues can, I mean, who are involved in so many activities, but also who have to wake up in the middle of the night for several times to do less. So maybe some of you who are in social sciences are also willing to give some concrete support in this term. But yeah.
Thank you, Daria. That is very, very precious what you just said and what you are doing. And let us know if we can join, and we can also spread your invitation to all participants who registers for the talk. Are there any other comments from our visitors, participants? Somebody is writing. Okay, that's not a question. I wanted just maybe to ask Sam about arms trade with Russia, because as far as I read from one of your colleague researchers, Russia is not importing weapon. It's not dependent on any other country or producer recently, but it is exporting weapons, and to feed over military industry, it needs clients, and they used to be around the world. Some of them are also allies in the Security Council in this matter of the current war. What in this arms trade can be done also to stop the war immediately?
Yeah, Russia imports very little by way of arms. It produces almost all of its own arms. There used to be some small-scale European arms exports to Russia, France in particular. That mostly stopped after 2014. There was an EU arms embargo that went into force on July 31st, 2014. That had an exception that existing contracts could continue. And so that there was quite a bit still going, especially from France and Germany for a year or two, but then since then it stopped to Russia. I mean, and they've looked elsewhere, I think including Israel at times, for drone technology. I think because they were very, very far behind on drone technology. But they've caught up on that. So Russia buys arms from the Russian arms industry, which of course I'm sure is profiting a lot now. Russia is probably the second largest arms exporter worldwide. That they have India as their biggest client. They sell a lot to Egypt. They still sell quite a bit to China, though China produces more of its own now. I think I read one interesting statistic that of Russia's top 10 arms customers, only one of them, I'm not sure which, voted for the motion in the UN General Assembly to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you know, those arms trade links are quite significant. Of course, the West is just as guilty as Russia in arming dictatorships, in arming countries at war, like Saudi Arabia and so forth. I don't think that sort of the rest of the world can force Russia to stop selling arms at the moment. You know, that's going to have to come from Russian civil society. America attempts sometimes to pressure other countries not to buy arms from Russia by threatening them with sanctions. That sort of threat, that sort of insisting that countries stay dependent on the US, tends to backfire. So you know, they told Turkey you can't have the F-35 if you buy Russian S-400 air defenses, and Turkey said, okay, we won't have the F-35 because, you know, they don't like to be blackmailed like that. So
Sam,
yeah, I don't have a clear answer to how you stop that.
Yeah. Knowing all these facts, is this idea and request for demilitarization, from what you know, how real it is? Do you see options in what you know about arms trade interests, alliances? Yes.
It's a long struggle. It's not going to happen overnight, but there is increasing disgust about cases like, you know, the arming of Saudi Arabia for bombing Yemen. That there's increasing discontent about that in many countries. Of course, there's disgust about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as I said, I think that I hope that countries are going to come to realize that the attempt to solve your problems with military force, with launching wars overseas, just does not work. The US has, to some extent, I think maybe they're starting to learn that lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan, though there's still a long way to go there. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight, and it will require civil society in different countries to work together. And in countries like Russia and China, where there is so little space for civil society, that's very difficult at the moment. So yeah, I think there are prospects, but it's going to take a long time.
Thank you, Sam. Vesna, you want to say something, and then we will close.
I just wanted to call your attention that for years now exists a network, EU-Russia Civil Society Forum. Mm-hmm. And one of the co-chairs is also from Documenta, a center where I'm active. So it's that it is a long-term effort in Russia. It's very much linked with activists of Memorial being, you know, blacklisted and actually forbidden to work now, finally, although they still keep working. So it's that I believe that building such alliances is important. It's important to go in Ukraine and, you know, to coordinate our efforts. And just make things step by step, but also very clearly stating what our political demands are. Even if we have feeling that no one hears us, some will hear at a certain point.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for this positive attitude, Vesna, and we will stay in touch to see what we can do from this talk on. We will stay in touch with Yurii. And thank you all for coming, joining. Let's advocate for peace and stay in touch. Thank you, Sam, for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.